always put your customer first. Always think, are you meeting your mission of why you were established to serve your customer?
Today's guest is Marina Gracias. She's the general counsel at Varo Bank. If you haven't heard of Varo, they're the first and only digital-only nationally chartered bank in the US. They went through the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, the FDIC, and the Federal Reserve and got a de novo bank charter. Now, those of you who are lawyers, and especially financial services lawyers, will appreciate that is a very big deal. No one had done that in fintech before, and Marina was the one who ran that process from first lawyer in the door through to literally Series G today. Before Varo, she spent close to 6 years at Visa running global procurement, then Accenture as a managing director. And before all of that, Marina spent a decade at Providian, first as a lawyer and then on the business side. She's also, fun fact, on the board of the business school at Haas School of Business at UC Berkeley. As an alum, this makes me quite excited. Let's dive in with Marina. Excited you're here.
Thanks for having me.
Of course, let's dive in. So I want to start with, dive right in, something you believe about the legal profession that a lot of people would argue with. I strongly believe this one, so I don't think it's a spicy take, but let's dive in. You believe that the best lawyers are actually generalists, and being a generalist is an advantage, even with the alphabet soup of regulators you're dealing with. So unpack that a little bit.
So I think what's good about being a generalist is you get to experience so many areas of the law. And I should say, when I mean generalist, let's talk about, like, I don't mean going from human resource law to being a litigator to being a corporate attorney. But for example, within corporate, I would encourage everybody to try to get as much experience in all the different areas that you can get exposed to. I think sometimes, so I'll give you an example. When I was first hired at Providian, I was hired to be a securitization lawyer and manage their home equity portfolio as being their counsel. And often I would ask people, like, do you have other work for me? Do you have other work for me? And my knowledge, I grew as an attorney. I started doing work with the credit bureaus. I started doing M&A work. We opened a bank in the UK and bought portfolios. And then I did the same thing in Argentina. And it was great. I had, a broad experience then in different areas of the law, all within banking, but, different areas within banking. And it did help because eventually we sold the home equity portfolio. And securitizations we weren't doing as many. But, I had started doing so many other areas of the law that it became really helpful because I could find other things to do at Providian. And then as Providian grew, I could continue growing in different areas.
Love it. So what, that idea of switching up what you do every few years. Like I frequently, for me on the hiring side, it's like, I don't want people that have had the same 3 years of experience, 5 times. That is not 15 years experience. That's 3. So is that what you're talking about? And was it intentional? Did it just happen? You mentioned the sale of the mortgage business. What, 2-part question, do you have to be intentional about switching that up? And then how were you intentional about it?
Yeah. So I do think people should be somewhat intentional. I don't think I was. I think I was just lucky that I had, grown my portfolio of knowledge so that as the company evolved, I still continued having a role and the work was still interesting. And I think all through my career that has happened, and people ask me, even at Varo, I've been there 10 years now. How could you be there 10 years? And I think at every company where I've stayed that long, it has been a different journey each time. So when I joined Varo, I was employee number 8. It was before we had a product in market, and I was the solo attorney. But I got to learn how to work with the engineers, how to do product development with them. We did our first financing round, within 30 days of my being there. And I'd never done fundraising. I got to work through the financing documents. But then, Varo continued to evolve. It grew as a fintech. We did a sponsor bank, but then we decided to do the bank chartering process. And we went through the bank chartering process. At the time we did it, it took us 3 years. Now the OCC has finally decided to do it faster. But then we opened the bank. I mean, not many people can probably say they built the bank from the ground up, but we had that experience. And then, and then we've continued as we brought new products to market. So someone, even if you stay at the same company, I would highly recommend seek out new opportunities. So you don't have to move companies, but you do continue to learn. Now, I will say, but there are people, I like to continue to learn and do different things. There are probably some people who want to just do the same thing and they're comfortable and that's how they want to do it. But just not my cup of tea kind of thing.
Yeah. So I guess here's a question is like, you walk in as the 8th employee at a company that is gonna be a bank, but isn't yet. What were you thinking? Like, I'm kind of like, you were this like super successful lawyer. It's a crazy story. Like, I think we all kind of want that, but it's this like, the amount of risk aversion that all of us have, but also like, do you have faith in that moment that it's going to work? Like just put us in your shoes at that time.
Yeah, so first I was a partner at Accenture. I gave that up to become the 8th employee at this startup. Now, I think
the background for the listeners, like partner at Accenture is like, you're talking probably 7-figure comp. Like you're talking like it's a big job. Okay. So contrast that with employee number 8 at a startup. All right. So set the scene. So, all right. So we're there. So continue.
So to begin with, for most people who've started at startups, when you're that young, you're coming in actually as a consultant. You're not even an employee. You are a consultant. But I think what really made me want to do this is the fact that I wanted to do something different. While I enjoyed my time at Accenture and it was a great company, I just felt like I'm getting bored. I'm doing the same thing. And the job I had at Accenture was a very unique job. It was a deal negotiator. You were dropped in, you negotiated a deal for somebody when they were hiring Accenture, and then you left. And you went on to do your next deal negotiation. It is a very lonely position because you just drop in, you work with people, you're dropped out. And so I really missed the relationship. So I asked a friend of mine who happened to be an executive recruiter who I worked out with. She and I went to the same health club. And I said to her, I've not looked for a job in like 20 years. I've been following people. Every job I've gotten has been built through a relationship. I don't even know how to go about finding another job. So she and I talked about, what I was looking for. And she said, I know of a startup that's just starting. I don't even know if they want a counsel, but, the recruiters all were somebody from Lending Club. And I said, I know the Lending Club recruiters. A lot of them originally came from Providian. And sure enough, I knew the recruiter. And then I knew one of the other co-founders. He was also from Providian. So he said, come on over, I'll tell you what we're going to do. And he came over to Accenture and he kind of whiteboarded what they were doing. And it's a mission-based. It was really to help people who had been left out of financial services really build a low-cost banking product that would include them in the banking system. And I thought, I want to be part of this. I want to be part of sort of like giving back now. And he said, come meet our CEO. And I will tell you, Colin Walsh, she was the founder of had run Amex in Europe and had just come back to the US. So that's the other thing that kind of gave me comfort moving. It was a startup that was built by bankers. People who understood the law and would understand what it needed to have happen. So anyway, I met Colin for coffee and he said, I'd like to continue the conversation and maybe have you come over. And I said, I'm going to Dubai on vacation. I'll talk to you when I come back. And he says, no, let's continue talking. And then we just talked for that one day. And then while I'm on vacation, he's sending me stuff to, would you look at this? Would you look at that? And I really got enamored with the work. Came back, resigned from Accenture and joined him. So I think two things that probably gave me comfort for like taking the leap was this was a group who knew what they were doing. They were bankers. They knew what it would take to, offer financial services. And I guess I took the leap thinking, you know what, if it didn't work out, I'd have to look for another job. But, sometimes you just have to take the leap of faith that it'll work out. And I will say maybe the other thing that sort of gave me comfort of doing that, Through my career, I've often had where things didn't work out the way I wanted to work out and I'd have to take a different path. It has always been the better path in the end. So I think I kind of had that faith that, you know what, if it didn't work out, that's okay. I'll find something that will be even better for me.
Were there so skipping to the a little bit the denouement, basically Varo has raised a Series G funding round, $240 million. You've raised in the hundreds of millions. You serve millions of customers, and it's been a smashing success by and large. When did you know that it was going to be successful and that your faith that you had in taking the role was paying off?
Well, I think I had the faith fairly early because our original Series A investor was Warburg Pincus. So, very large global private equity firm who believed in the company. And at the time they invested, our Series A was 27 million. That was the largest Series A that had been done in fintech at that time. So I guess part of what gave me the faith was just the fact that a large PE firm who had done a lot of research in the space had chosen Varo to put their bet behind. And I am really a relationship-driven person. I really liked everyone at the company. I liked the people we worked with. I had great faith in the management team. And I think that really goes a long way.
Was there any crisis or moment of doubt? So you've raised the Series A, champagne bottles all around. Presumably you go to New York. It's, I'm picturing smoke-filled rooms. But after that, was there any moment of doubt that stands up in your head?
I think probably one of the early moments of doubt. So when we first started wanting to go through the bank chartering process, Colin and I went and we met with the OCC, we met with the FDIC, and we met with the Fed. And nobody had done this like in 10 years. So everyone was kind of a little rusty on how to do it. And every one of them said, don't worry, in 120 days, you'll have your charter application done. And we filed, and then as they started going through it, it was like the cobwebs started going away from them, and they realized, wait, this is a little more complicated. And they started asking for more and more documents. And I think the first time the FDIC suddenly realized they couldn't work in parallel, they had to come in a later process, and they said, withdraw your application and come back later. I was like, oh my God, this could take us a lot longer than we thought and would become way more expensive than we thought. I think we ended up spending almost $1 million in the end just on this. And, it was a lot more than we anticipated ever spending. And 3 years was a lot longer than we anticipated. Yeah. And so all during this, and you're watching other fintechs that are also there that are not going through the chartering process. So even after you get the charter, you're thinking, yes, we're happy we have it and we're opening the bank, but we're also watching our competitors all doing it without the charter. And so it does make you second guess, like sometimes should we? But then you just see how it helps you control your destiny. You're able to control your data. You're able to offer so many more services, your cost of capital and all is lower. And now, as the OCC has opened up the chartering process, is just watching all the competitors line up to now get it. And that sort of validates, yes, we did the right thing.
So this so for those of us who maybe aren't, assume that we're smart lawyers listening and we're not necessarily familiar with the charter process, what's the kind of like door number one, door number two thing? And when you say fintech versus bank, explain to me like I'm maybe not 5, but explain to me like I'm 14, what that difference is and why it was such a big decision.
So most fintechs are not a bank. They are really a marketing arm for a bank. And so they don't own the customer. The bank owns the customer. They don't really own the deposits. The bank owns the deposits. So that their cost of capital, they're constantly borrowing from the outside market actually to run their operations. Now, the bank is probably sharing an income with them, but it's not the same. As a bank, you own the customer, you own the deposits, you work directly with the Fed, You work directly with the regulators. Take something simple as Zelle, which a lot of people use to move money. If you're a fintech, you can't offer Zelle because Zelle can only be offered by a bank. So we can offer our customers Zelle. We can work with the Fed. And so we have access, we can put deposits with the Fed, we can, work with it. And so you just get so many more access to things, but it gives you more access to the products. More importantly, you control the customer relationship, you own the data. So even, for example, speaking of AI, we use AI, we've always used large language models like in underwriting. And now when we use generative AI, whether we use it for data models or for things like that, we can use it really much more across the board because we own the data. And when you're fintech, you don't own the data, the bank owns the data.
And so that's basically, really, it's like, it's kind of like, I mean, there's a lot of situations like this in tech where it's like, this is probably dates me, but I was at, Yahoo when it was like, do you own the map data? And then it was like, NavTech and, Apple spent, in the billions to build Apple Maps, and it's still not that good. But anyways, this idea of owning your data and owning the relationship, to me, it kind of puts, it's not surprising, I guess, then that Varo would hire a really high-powered lawyer as employee number 8. So do you feel like you're in basically product development then in that scenario where the legal side of being able to, to move money legally, obviously, and being able to do it without a back end and only the fintech side being the marketing arm, it means that you're, I mean, obviously more than just a lawyer, but what does that mean? Like, what does it mean to be in-house in that scenario? Are you effectively kind of like the number 2 to the CEO, or like tell us about that? Because I think for me, from a career standpoint, I think it'll be interesting to our listeners. I worked at one regulated industry company. I was the general counsel of an education company that it was an interesting business model, but essentially it was called income share agreements, where you would take a percentage of people's income that they achieved having attended the school. And so it hit lending law, it hit education law, it hit employment law. It was very highly regulated. And I'll be completely honest that after that job, I'm like, I'm not going to be a GC in regulated industry again. Like, I literally was like, I'm not doing it. And at that time, I was already thinking about moving more to the business side, which of course, obviously I've done. But curious, like, when you are literally, the regulation is kind of like existential to the company, what is it like to be a GC there? Is it more of a business role? Do you like that? Talk to us about that.
Yeah, I think to begin with, because I've always, once I left the law firm and went in-house, I've always done financial services, from Providian to Visa, even Accenture as financial services, and now Varo. So I think part of that also then makes you very comfortable with working in a regulated environment. Virtually everything you do, there's some regulation around it. So you sort of have to have that comfort level of knowing you've always got to think through the regulation. But I think moving to a startup, you learn to, or all lawyers need to learn, you work business and you work the law. You have to understand the product. You work very closely with the engineers. I think for me, one of the most fascinating things about moving to Varo was there was a whole ecosystem really of all startups that existed, that were, working. I was very surprised when I came to Varo and we were developing the app to find out we could check BSA instantaneously through another startup vendor who had, developed a whole database, to be able to check for BSA. And BSA is the Bank Secrecy Act. And when you open a bank account, you need to really sort of verify the person's identity. And you could do it instantaneously. And that was like fascinating, like, oh my God, there are vendors that do this. The other thing is we take an imprint of the phone. There's a vendor that we will connect to who will take an imprint of your phone as you're connecting to us and will verify it's a valid phone. And to me, it was fascinating, and that they can verify, like, you say you're logging in from an iPhone 16, but your IMEI is not related to an iPhone 16. It's related to a different type of phone, which then immediately alerts you there's something fraudulent about this phone. So every time somebody logs in, these kind of checks can be run. So to me, it was also fascinating, learning about the whole ecosystem that kind of was supporting the bank, but that existed out there. That when you work in the larger companies, you have no reason to know any of these other people exist. And so, yeah, so it does kind of make you cross over and you learn a lot more about the product and the business. And then when you're the solo attorney in a regulated environment, you learn marketing scripts, you look at screens to see, everything the customer is going to see.
So you mentioned fraud. In financial services, like obviously fraud is one of the biggest business issues that you deal with. And I had such fun reading there was a book about, I think it was basically like the story of Uber. And I think it was, one of the interesting things they talked about was just the extent and variety of the fraud that was dealt with. So they literally had people where, to your point on the phone detection, they would find out if the phone was shaking, right? Because that was kind of like, okay, they would use the accelerometer in the phone to tell if rides were actually being ridden. And one of the fraud mechanics was literally you could buy like effectively a simulator that you could sit at your desk that would kind of shake the phone. And, and that was like one avenue, but there were thousands. And it was this like, interesting cat and mouse game. And, it was a whole chapter with their head of security. I guess like with that background, like, would you say that role of like, of being the general counsel or the person, ultimately responsible for compliance at a fintech, trying kind of building this from the ground up in a very tech forward way? I mean, is it a fun job? Like, give us more avenue to the fun, and then how do you avoid the frustration of that whack-a-mole? Because like literally for us, like you mentioned Zelle, like I mean, we've got state AGs looking at Zelle and the fraud that is possible. Anyway, is it fun? And then how is it not crazy frustrating?
So it is fun because you're constantly learning about new things that are going on there. Bringing new products to market to really help our customers is fun because you can kind of think what products and designing products, and it's the product managers who design the products, but then helping them actually get them in a framework or in a way that can actually be marketed is interesting. But I think what is frustrating is to find out there are fraud actors who are just always ahead of people. So we went to an OCC presentation just about 2 days ago, and they had a whole presentation on cybersecurity. And one of the things that there was a whole talk about AI and how AI is helping. There are good things about AI because, it helps us be able to service our customers a little better. But there's a bad side of AI too, which is the fraudsters are using it, whether they're using it to help do phishing into the companies, taking over emails, getting your voice imprints so that they can, do fake calls to people, asking people to wire money, things like that. So it's always sort of a cat and mouse game going on with the fraudsters and with the tools that can be put in to help detect it. Because you're right, just like your example of Uber, the banks are always kind of looking for, are there, you look at fraud attacks, are there people who are logging in, but the amount of times they're logging in just is not really reasonable, like people don't even type that fast. So you look for things like that.
All right, let's see. So I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about AI. You have seen a lot of technology waves in your career, I mean, including literally the rise of fintech. I think fintech, the category name, was probably created in your time. How do you see, particularly in your industry, financial services, how has tech changed things? And maybe it hasn't, but has it changed what you sell, what you do, how customers experience it?
Yeah. So, I mean, it's sad sometimes when I hear people are so nervous of AI because they worry about AI taking their jobs, and I truly am of the belief AI some people's job may be eliminated, but I think the majority of the people, their job will be changed, but changed in how you do your job. And, so we've seen AI be used, and in many ways, AI can be used to better serve a customer. So, and I know for a lot of people, sometimes they're frustrating experiences with chatbots because a particular vendor's use of AI may not be the best thing for the way they're using it for the chatbot. But in other ways, sometimes for a very simple customer request, the AI tool can provide them the information they need quickly and, solve their problem more quickly. We've seen AI be used to help create, you see people marketing scripts. Marketing materials can be created so much faster. So the velocity of being able to bring new products can increase with it. Even, when you talked about the bank chartering process, and this is really even for legal, I would not be surprised if many of the charter applications that are created these days have an AI tool has been used to create them. Because it just makes no sense not to do it that way. There is a public portion of your bank charter application that's available. Why wouldn't a lawyer who needs to write the public portion actually go look at what a lot of people who have similar lines of business have used? I mean, there's no reason not to do it that way. Banks have to have policies. Most bank policies are fairly standard. Again, why wouldn't you use an AI tool to create all the policies? A human will go back and look at it and make sure if there are changes that need to be made or make it more specific to your company. But again, why wouldn't you do it that way? I would think most people use customer communications, the first drafts of your customer communications. I think most people use AI tools. Even my product lawyer told me the way one of the things she started, which is really a good way of using it too, is we have customer terms, that go out for the different products. But different products come to market at different times. So you write terms at different times. And I may have written some of the terms, she may have written some of the terms. But she's using an AI tool to now go and look at all our terms for consistency. So to make sure that even if they're written at different times, even if they're written by different people, they're consistent for the consumer. And so there are all these different uses that before would have taken somebody hours to sit and read all the terms to look for consistency. We can have it done very quickly.
So it is funny you mentioned that about AI for customer comms. I was noticing that just as a consumer, you get terms of use updates, and they're better since AI. Actually, I've been impressed. Is actually that like writing plain English things, and I mean that's actually something we do at GCAI. Is like this idea that AI can help you make communications better, land the message better with any stakeholder, like not just internally but also consumers. And your point about like it's kind of like, yeah, could you, calculate numbers by hand, but like, why would you? Like, yeah, you can, but like, why? And so I love that. On the kind of tech waves side, so basically, it sounds like you advocate for a version of Jevons paradox, which of course, fancy term, but basically when things become available, people use more of them. So you're saying there's going to be an explosion of new products, new ways to encounter financial services, and basically therefore there will be more work for lawyers and we're all fine? Or like what's the kind of therefore?
I think lawyers will have to learn to adapt the technology to figure out the best way to use it. I mean, we also see, because we're consumer facing, we have customers who write to us, and some customers choose to use an AI tool to write their complaints. Because you can see, sometimes it helps them, they're better written, they're more precise what they want. Sometimes they've used it to throw the kitchen sink of every regulation that might be touched on them, might be in that letter. eventually it's trying to find the right basis for it. But I think all lawyers will have to adapt to using AI in order to make not only their job more efficient, but I think in many ways it helps the lawyer do a better job. Now, we all know about hallucinations, and so you do have to check for it, but there are many ways, my person on the contract side, the way when she wants summaries of the contract done, to also make sure that, the tool doesn't create and tell her what the tool thinks she wants to hear, is she asks the tool, give me the references of where does this occur in the contract? Or give me the exact quote of the language. So I think, all the things where people say why they don't want to use AI, I think we can find ways of addressing it to minimize the things that could be wrong with the use of AI.
How do you keep your team performing at a high bar?
So I think part of it is, and we have a very small team, but part of it is also encouraging people to sort of choose how they want to work. And what I mean by that is, if I ask you to review a contract, or if I ask you to support the business, I don't tell you how to do it. I'm assuming I'm hiring smart people who will know how to do it and will know how to raise their hand and ask when they have a question or ask for when they would need help. And yet at the same time, we hired a very junior attorney. And one of the reasons for hiring somebody very junior was there's always work for a very junior person to do. And it helps them learn. And if there's somebody who's willing to say, I want to work across different areas, whether it be product, whether it be corporate, whether it be litigation, and they want to learn across, but then it's helping provide the right level of guidance to that person. So it's sort of also understanding the skill set of the person and kind of where their knowledge level is. And to the people who need a little more guidance, providing a little more guidance, but learning when you need to pull back and kind of let them do it. And then the most important thing is, if there is a mistake made, kind of help them learn from it, but it's not a punishment time for somebody. And then realize, if it's something, you stand up for your team and you say, legal made a mistake. You don't point out who in legal made the mistake. It's, we made the mistake, we will own it, we will correct it.
How do you create a culture of compliance, or so one of the things that the Uber book gets into is that, okay, the fundamental business model of Uber was in some ways illegal, right? It was required to have, taxi charters or medallions or whatever it is, depending on the city, but they had such strong product market fit and pull because it was so convenient. It was so clear that the technology was leapfrogging what existed before. Mm-hmm. that was a legitimate way to do business. And I don't think, anybody looking at the business would have said, no, you should have been more compliant, work with taxi companies, whatever. Right. That's, not the case if you're choosing to be a regulated bank. And so I suspect there is something culturally, like the people that you hire, the people that you promote, and, legal obviously is a place to start it, but you're an executive at the company. Put us in the room when it's like, okay, how do we create that culture? And maybe it was intentional, maybe it wasn't, but give us a little bit of insight on that.
Yeah. So I will say, I think in a way, Uber is sort of the ultimate example, because everything I've heard is they believed more in pushing it. Doesn't matter if they break the law, they'll take the consequences and they'll figure it out on the back end.
Yes. Well, you're absolutely right. It's sort of like FedEx, right? So look, FedEx is a great business, but if you look at it from an economic standpoint, it makes more sense for them to pay parking tickets and deliver packages than it does for the driver to drive around for 20 minutes or whatever trying to deliver the thing, right? So it's kind of like an economics thing. So I'm with you. Uber has taken that extreme view. I'm assuming in banking, you can't do that. So what do you do instead?
Yes, banking, because you're a charter, you're regulated, the regulators can give you consent orders, can actually come down very hard on you. So I think the way we did it was, from the very beginning, trying to get the business to understand that legal was not the Department of No, that we would listen to you. And so what I often tell my attorneys, and I try to make sure when we hire for this, is that somebody who is more likely to ask the business, tell me what you want to accomplish. So don't focus so much on how they come to you to tell you, I want to do this. Try to figure out what's your ultimate goal. Like, what are you trying to do? And then sort of work with them to figure out, how can we do it within the regulations we have? Because a lot of times, at least you'll find in banking, the regulations sometimes are very cut and dry. A lot of times it's up to interpretation. And you do have to look, has this been interpreted and how has it been interpreted? But you usually will have some leeway to figure it out. But you have to be flexible to work with the business to say, well, you can't really do it this way, but you know what, if you're willing to do it this way, you can. And I think the other thing that as lawyers we have to be really open to is looking at how competitors are doing or what they're doing. Because, the first thing your business will tell you if you say, no, you can't do that is, well, just like the kid who says, well, so-and-so is doing it. And sometimes it's worthwhile looking at how the competitor is doing it.
I mean, I think... go ahead, sorry.
No, because sometimes maybe they've interpreted or they've found an interpretation that works. And so a lot of times, if our first reaction is, we don't know how this works, like how could it work? We will also look at it and then see if there's a way of doing it. And I think once you show the business you're willing to partner with them, it makes them more willing to want to comply. But for many years, we've always had this tension within Varo between, are we a bank? Are we a technology company? But I think if you show people you can blend the two, so you don't have to be one or the other, you can actually be both. But you have to be flexible in order to do that.
I mean, I think it's a fundamental, what you explained, this idea of benchmarking where other companies are. It's also kind of a way of benchmarking where society is and where the political tides are. And on these issues, I mean, you mentioned the bank charter where you get one and then suddenly now every fintech is going for a bank charter. And you were presumably the benchmark competitor that they were looking at. So that makes sense. I think it's a really interesting product counseling skill. So we talk a lot on this podcast about product counseling and what that means. And product counseling in fintech is really keeping a pulse on, even all the way to what administration, right? So obviously, I think Paul Graywall and others at Coinbase have done this. We had Molly Abraham on the pod, and crypto being a whole new category is like that product counseling at the highest levels. So what advice would you give? Let's do that. So topical news item, Paul Graywall stepped down from Coinbase and Molly Abraham is the new GC. 2 sentences of advice for Molly, brand new GC, regulated industry, obviously lots of eyeballs all the way at the, to the presidential level. What's your advice?
So one advice that I would give her, and I think Paul did a good job of this too, is you build your relationship with your regulators. You invest the time to meet with them, to get to know them, and also create a level of trust with them so that they can feel comfortable that when they meet with you, you will be open, you will talk to them, you will explain things to them. And if something is not going well or there's an issue, you pick up the phone and you talk to them about it. So I think you build this level of relationship with the regulators. And in many ways, we have found for the regulators that, when we first went through the chartering process, we were in the cloud. We had no branches, something the regulators were not used to. We spent the time investing, talking to them, explaining to them how we would work the security aspect, how make sure the customers would have access to the money. So I would tell her, for the regulators, they're still learning your business. Be open with them, be willing to be a sounding board, be willing to share information with them. So that's kind of how to build the relationship with the regulators. I think the other thing is to always put your customer first. Always think, are you meeting your mission of why you were established to serve your customer? Because we often think about that when, we've tried to make sure our product still works for our customer as we bring new products to market. And so it's kind of balancing that too, is make sure your product continues to meet your customers' needs.
I love that. All right, so let's move to the lightning round. A sentence or a rallying cry you've used for yourself in your career and life.
Actually, I'll give you one. It's a value that Varo has, which is stay curious, and very similar to Berkeley Haas's motto of student always.
I love that. A book that has shaped you.
Built to last.
Love that one. So good. And then anything else you'd like to tell our audience? Or this has been a fascinating dive into fintech. I particularly liked the advice, and we'll tag Molly and the Coinbase folks on the sort of core product counseling advice. I love it. I love it. And customer obsession, like, come on, this is like, I'm so excited about that. But anything else you'd like our listeners to know about you, or parting wisdom you'd like to share?
So I think is be resilient. I truly believe that when things don't go right, don't give up. The opportunity that comes to you will be better than the one that didn't work out.
I love that. Awesome. Marina, this was so much fun. Thank you for joining.
Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed doing this.
That was Marina Gracias, the General Counsel and Corporate Secretary at Varo Bank. If you want to see how legal teams are using AI to move faster, better, and follow the customer-obsessed advice that we heard on the show, visit gc.ai. Follow GCI and Friends wherever you get your podcasts. We'll see you next time. Thanks.